Hey YouTubers, Todd Bergen. I am about to start a podcast with my friend Ross Brand of Livestream Universe. So after a few moments here where I do a couple technical things, we'll get started. So just stay tuned and hang in there. All right, we're going to go right now. Hey folks, I'm your host Todd Bergen, and you are listening to the Divorce the Workforce podcast. I interview entrepreneurs and online hustlers about what they do, why they do what they do, and how they go about doing it. Hear about their journey. Learn about how they got started, hear about their successes as well as their failures, and learn from them as you chart your own course to freedom. Welcome to the program. And today I have a very special guest, my friend Ross Brand of Livestream Universe. How you doing, Ross?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on the show, and congratulations on the new podcast. I know I'm putting one together myself. I know how much work it is, and man, you're off to an awesome start.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun. The pleasure's all mine that you're on my show. We've done a lot of talking over the last week, and we're both getting into podcasting right now. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where what you're going to do with your podcast?
Sure. Well, I've been doing a daily update on live streaming, which I've been posting on Facebook, on the Livestream Universe Facebook page. And really, it lends itself very well to a podcast because it's all basically me talking plus some clips from either from shows or from live streamers talking about what's going on in the news. And then it's a rundown of that day's schedule of shows. So I think it translates well to a podcast. So I'm in the process of taking the audio from that and putting it in my hosting service, and then we'll eventually, hopefully within the next few days, start distributing it to iTunes and other places where people can go and download it. And that way, if they don't have an internet connection, when they really want to listen to it, they can just download the podcast, listen to it on the way to work, and also hopefully reach a different audience as well.
Well, I think that sounds fabulous, and I think you will reach a different audience, and particularly with live video exploding the way it is, and we're still in the infancy of it,
right.
You're going to be introducing this concept and the live video platform to a whole group of people who may not really be paying attention to what's happening there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really see the potential of it even more than I do, and I'm excited by what you're doing. And we've been talking, over the last couple of weeks, as you mentioned, and I'm really seeing some potential for this, and hopefully people who discover it and start listening and start learning about what people are doing will come over and start watching some of the shows of people that I'm featuring. And also for people who can't find the time to necessarily stay on top of day to day what's going on with live video and whatever, they can still get a taste of it by hearing clips from shows, by hearing different live streamers talk about what platforms they're using and what's the latest in the live video world. It gives people within 3 to 5 minutes, 7 minutes at most, a chance to quickly get up to date on that day's activities, even if they didn't have a chance to actually watch any of the shows as they happen.
Sure. Now tell me this: you're really hitting the live video hard. You have a radio background, so how did you go from radio to live video, and are you still doing radio?
That's a great question. No, I actually stopped doing radio a while ago, and years before I found Blab. This what used to exist was, for a short time, perhaps what I like to call the greatest social network that ever existed. I absolutely fell in love with broadcasting again when I discovered Blab. It was just a couple days of watching. I'm like, wow, this is what I loved about talk radio. Blab is talk radio with webcams. And, for people who've never seen Blab, basically it gave you the ability to have 2 to 4 people on screen at one time, each in their own little window, side by side, talking to each other. It was a conversation. It was basically like I say, a talk radio show with webcams, and a whole community formed around it and became really tight, and people were watching shows, fairly long views, and it just was a wonderful experience. Now the website had its problems. It didn't really handle the tech side of things all that well, but the social features and the community features really made it a great place to go to discover what people were doing with this sort of new area of live streaming. There had been live video for a while, but the apps that came along in 2015 really brought live streaming to a much greater public, both through the cell phone apps like Periscope and Meerkat, and Meerkat isn't around either anymore, but through platforms like Blab. So it was on Blab that I discovered this thing called live streaming, right? I had no idea what it was, what people were doing, and I just started watching shows for a couple days. I was like, this is amazing. This is so cool. And there's a lot of talented people, and I can get advice on marketing, and I can get advice on, personal development, and I can hear people talking about what's in the news, what's going on in sports. This is wonderful, right? And it's like TV on my computer or talk radio on my computer. But before then, I'd never really used the webcam. I'd done a couple Google Plus Hangouts on air where I was on for a few minutes, but that was it. So a whole new world opened to me, and I started just seeing that there really weren't any place to there wasn't any place to go to see where you could find shows, right? So how do I know what's coming up? How do I know what to watch today, right? So I started a Twitter account, started tweeting about what I thought were the good shows when they were on, letting people know, and there was a pretty good following after a short period of time. So then it became a website, and I started doing that on the website, started embedding videos, and eventually I got the bug and started doing a show, and from there things really took off.
And so that's what Livestream Universe, that's how it started, was with the Twitter feed initially, and now it's become what it's become now.
Yeah, I mean, it started with the Twitter feed. I think in 8 days I had 500 followers, and I was like, okay, there really is a passionate, it may be small, but it's passionate. So, that core was there right away, and people seem to really like seeing their shows being featured on Twitter. And I think I started an Instagram account, started taking photos from shows and posting them and saying, so and so are live now and whatever. And so the next step then was the website. And I can't say there was a ton of traffic to the website. I was embedding the Blabs, I was embedding other shows on the website, I was our featured show for the next day and things like that. But there wasn't really that much activity around that. So I started hosting shows with the idea of promoting the website, but the show sort of took on a life of its own. So I'd say the Livestream Stars show that I was hosting on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern, and I continue to host on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern, is really kind of what opened the doors to the community for me. And I started inviting on people who were doing live streaming and talking about what they were doing and how they were using it to build their business or their personal brand, and what platforms they liked and where they thought it was going. And from that, that really was my strongest entry into it. And I've loved doing the show ever since. And so now I'm kind of back to being a broadcaster, but I'm very big on trying to cover what's going on with live streaming and keep people informed and showcase the other people who are doing good things in live streaming.
Now, I guess my question is, how do you compare, and I think the question is obvious, or the answer might be obvious to a lot of us, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on, what do you see the difference being between radio and live video? And are you having more fun with the live video than you did with the radio?
Wow. I'm having more fun, but it may be where I'm at in life. It may be that this is, at least in part at this time, more hobby than profession. So there's different joys and different pressures and things like that. But the most obvious difference and the most fun for me is the real-time feedback, the chat function, the interactivity, having a live audience there. While not in person, it's there in the broadcast. There are people in the chat room, in the chat on Facebook Live, in the chat on the various platforms who are commenting in real time, submitting questions. Yes, you can do call in, and it's one caller at a time on radio, and the audience is out there, but it feels much more distant, right? Here, the audience feels really close. You know a lot of the people because they come to your shows. And so I feel like it adds a whole new dimension to the broadcast, being able to interact with people who are watching it in real time, get their feedback, crowdsource great questions, bring people on from the chat, and they come on in video and they're there with you and they can talk to you and your guest. So I think that is the biggest difference and the thing that I really love the most. Obviously, there's the video side. I think the video side is nice, but not nearly as important to the content as is really the community and the interactivity and the social aspect of it. And that's all to do with the chat and the ability to get that real-time feedback.
Well, and Blab's a perfect example of what you're talking about. I got to Blab late, and I was prepping to start a show on Blab when the tailspin was obvious and it was going away. I was only on Blab one time. Joel Comm did a show, kind of a last minute, just I'm at home and bored. Anyone who wants to join in with me can join in with me. And I had a blast. And it was kind of, I hadn't been on there at all except for that one time. I'd been studying it and planning my entry, and the tailspin started, and so I dropped it. But I imagine for people like you, that it was really a bummer to see it go away. How long had you been on there prior to its demise?
Yeah, so I started on Blab hosting. I started watching Blabs in early October of 2015, and immediately, I launched that Twitter account that I was talking about, and Livestream Universe was on its way, right? But I started hosting a show in mid to late November, and I think I did my last show on Blab in mid to late May of 2016. So, a good 7-8 months on Blab. It was a fun run. It was, here's the thing: the quality of the platform in terms of the technical aspects weren't the greatest, right? The video and audio could be unstable. It was unreliable. They changed features a lot, and sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. They didn't give people warning of when they were going to work or not to work. You kind of discovered what was new when you you came on to host your show. And then they somewhere along the way they killed the discovery on the homepage, and you couldn't nearly as easily scroll down and see all the shows coming up, which was the way I sort of sourced what I was going to promote for the next day, the next week, what have you. So there was plenty of things that weren't great about Blab, particularly as time went on, right? But what Blab had done that was amazing, and whether that credit should be given to the people at Blab or whether that was the nature of the community that came together or some combination thereof. But Blab had some features that really led itself to community building. When somebody entered into their first Blab, it said, the name of the person is welcome them to Blab. It's their first day or their first show or whatever. And, immediately it starts the conversation with people thinking in terms of clicking that welcome button and saying, hey, whatever the person's name is, welcome, and the conversation's already going. So the chat and the social integration, the ability to tweet out right from the show, and the tweet was already basically written for you, so people were sharing it all over social media. There were just some really great features that lent itself to community building, and people would go on Blab and they just hang out. They just hang out for you'd have the show, right? But before the show, there was the pre-show where you would just chat. Then they had the record button, so you'd hit the record, you'd do the show that you were going to do, and then at the end of the show, you'd turn off the recording and you'd go, quote unquote, off the record, and then people would have conversations for another hour, an hour and a half, and sometimes it was more interesting than the show itself. Of course, the show was kind of what brought people together, but the fact that we were having these conversations and people would just stay on for hours and get to know each other and share their thoughts on whatever it was that they were passionate about. It was really a wonderful experience.
I've heard several of the bigger names on Blab say the same thing, that the pre and post program content was really awesome.
And let me just add one thing real quick, Todd, because I think this is important to mention its impact, right? When I think about who I communicate with, right? Who's on my calendar, who I'm sending messages to on Facebook or Twitter or email or whatever during the course of a day, right? I would say a very large majority of those folks are people that I had no idea who they were before I got on Blab.
It's amazing.
So that it's amazing. It's almost like life changing. So I've been very critical of how the Blab team went about shutting down the platform and communicating with people, and I felt they were disrespectful to their community and so forth. And they have every right. They have every right, and in fact, the responsibility to pivot their business in a way that's in the best interest of their investors and their employees and the bottom line, right? But it was the way that they went about it, which they could have done better, right? But there's no getting away from the fact that the platform had a tremendous impact, and you could survey a lot of people who were on Blab, and they would say, it's only because of Blab that I know all these people who are now an important part of my life.
Sure. Well, and that kind of brings us to life in live video post Blab. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that, because I've actually been researching this to see where I'm going to make my entry, and I've spent way too much time thinking about it. But I know that there is, I've been toiling between Crowdcast and Huzzah, however you pronounce that.
Right.
And I felt like I was coming to a conclusion on that. And then BeLive showed up, and I've tried BeLive, and I've got BeLive people that have given me access to everything in beta, so I can do conversations like on Blab. I actually have an appointment with BeLive people next week on the phone to go over some of this stuff, which is kind of surprising. They actually contacted me and want to get me on the phone. But, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the post-Blab live video possibilities. Crowdcast, Huzzah, BeLive. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with these. What are your thoughts on these, and where do you see people going?
I think right now Facebook Live is where it's at. So a platform that gives you the ability to easily go to Facebook Live, unless you're going to produce your show with Wirecast and bring your guest in on Skype, or use a platform just to conduct the interview and then capture the video with Wirecast, which is an encoding software that you can produce live video and then stream it to Facebook Live. If you're not going to do that, and I don't do that really for my live shows, I've done it for a couple shows, but basically I like to focus on the conversation when I'm doing a live interview, and so I use Wirecast to produce my updates, but not for most of my live shows. So you need a platform. You need some place to host your video, your conversation, your interview, before you stream it using your desktop. How do you get it to Facebook Live, right? You're not just picking up a cell phone, click and go live. You have an interview set up. You need to bring a second person in. You need the side-by-side view and all that. So you need a platform. The question then comes, which one, right?
Sure.
If you don't need to go to Facebook Live, or you're not interested in going to Facebook Live, and for some people there's good reason not to, right? If your priority is more, well, we do it live, but I really want a good recorded video to put on YouTube, and I don't care how many people watch on Facebook, or I really just want the show to be for the people in the room, so to speak, on the platform, and who I'm going to invite in to ask questions and things like that. Then platforms like Fire Talk or Crowdcast are fine options, right? Back in, I think, August, I did a piece comparing what at the time were, I thought, the three best Blab replacements: Fire Talk, Crowdcast, and Huzzah, as I think the founders pronounce it, Huzzah. That they kind of want it to be vague, so people are playing around with the pronunciation.
Sure.
So anyway, those Fire Talk, Crowdcast, and Huzzah were the three that I thought were the leaders, right, to replace Blab. And at that time, I thought Fire Talk and Crowdcast were the best, and Huzzah was a little behind. Well, Huzzah got integration to Facebook Live just around that time, and I had mentioned it as something to watch, but it was a little wonky at that time, and there's still a little delay in it. But now I would say of those three platforms, Huzzah's the best buy, right? Because it allows you with the press of one button to go to Facebook Live. And that's where your discovery comes in, right? These other platforms don't really have great discovery. So that one click of the button to Facebook Live, and then you can always mention, hey, welcome to everybody watching on Facebook Live. If you'd like to, come on screen and ask us a question, here's the link to Huzzah. That's where we're doing the show, or if you want to join us in the chat. Or the other option is just drive people to Facebook Live, right? Just make that, then you can switch platforms all you want. As long as you're going out to Facebook Live, it doesn't really matter which one you use to host your show, and everybody just learns Facebook Live is the gathering place, and then you focus on watching that chat rather than the chat in the platform, or needing to watch two different chats. I hope this isn't getting too drilling down too far in terms of the minutia of how this stuff works. But these are all the factors to consider. And right now, I think the game is on Facebook Live, right? This is where the big players want to be. The other option for streaming, and there are people who stream to many platforms at once, whether they do it through Wirecast, or they send their Wirecast to sort of a restreaming service that then sends it to multiple places. But the other option is Periscope Producer. And you would need to use something like Wirecast or OBS, one of these software encoder systems, in order to produce your broadcast. But that allows you to go live instead of from your mobile, from your desktop, and you can then bring in an interview and have multiple cameras and the whole thing. So I'm kind of intrigued about the idea of the professional broadcast on Periscope, because that's another way to reach outside your inner network, right? Facebook is the people who've sort of opted in to be connected with you, right? They're friends. They're people who've liked your page, people who, when you share something, are likely to see it. Periscope is much like Twitter in that, anybody can find you as long as you put it out there. So there may be good reasons to go to Periscope as well. I think it all depends, of course, on somebody's, business priorities or branding priorities, or just which community resonates better with the subject matter and the personality of the host.
Now, on Periscope, to use the producer, don't you have to be a verified member? Like somebody just starting out can't just go and start using Periscope Producer, unless I'm misinformed.
No, you can apply. There's an application page, and as far as I know, verified or not verified, I got it. I'm not a verified account, and I hardly use Periscope.
Got it.
I haven't tried it yet, but there's two other platforms I should mention and you should look at, I think. One is Smile Time and the other is Blue Jeans. Smile Time's free. They say they intend to keep it free. And you can have multiple people on screen, and you can go with the press of a button to Facebook Live. So, and now they've come out just this week, they came out with a feature that allows you to actually bring the Facebook chat into Smile Time. So no longer do you have to have two windows open and be watching two separate chats. You can actually see the Facebook chat coming into your Smile Time. So the experience, both for you and for the person watching on Facebook Live, and for the people in the room on Smile Time, all becomes very integrated. And I think it's something that's got a lot of potential. The other platform is Blue Jeans. And right now they're doing a trial. They're going to come out with a scaled down. They're an enterprise software, and they're going to come out with a scaled down version for live streamers. But right now they're offering live streamers an opportunity to use a sort of a beta version for free, and that really has its own app, right? So it lets you conduct your interview in high quality, sort of like maybe not the quality of Skype, but it's very high quality. And so you're not reliant on Wi-Fi completely. If Wi-Fi drops for a second, you still stay connected. It's very, very stable audio and video, and it looks really high quality going out to Facebook Live. A little bland, but overall it's very high quality video. There isn't the social integration yet. they may do that. So I would consider Smile Time. I would consider Blue Jeans now. Probably before Fire Talk and Crowdcast, which were my two biggest recommendations, 3 or 4 months ago. I would consider Smile Time. I would consider Blue Jeans. I think Huzzah, because of their one button to Facebook Live, is still a player. And then the other one is Be Live. And Be Live is interesting because it's all about the Facebook Live experience and enhancing that. It gives you a way to conduct your interviews with a second person on screen and add some lower third graphic, comments and things like that. So it's starting to do some of what people would have otherwise needed Wirecast or another platform to do. And yet everybody's watching on Facebook Live. So it's a great way to incorporate some of those other platform features while still sending your audience to the same place on Facebook Live for each show. And really, you can highlight comments from Facebook Live big on the screen, and they show like the person's profile pic and things like that. So I'm impressed with where all these platforms are going. But no, that none of them are perfect. They're all working it out, right?
Sure.
I mean, the ideal is if you can do it and you have the bandwidth and you have, the hands and the eyes and, you have the technology and the computers and the machines and everything, obviously producing it yourself using Wirecast and bringing a guest in on Skype and all those type of things, that's going to be the most professional. But these platforms are good enough to get a quality show out on Facebook Live now without needing to do that. And so I like that there's options for everybody, right? Whatever stage you're at in broadcasting or what your goals are, there's a lot of options out there now. And if it's the options that maybe we're keeping somebody from getting started, it's, go ahead and get started and figure out your place as you go.
Yeah. Now I have a question for you. In relation to Blab allowed you to have up to 4 people, 3 including the host, or I guess there were sometimes a co-host. So, but a total of 4 people at one time could be on Blab. Do all of these platforms allow for 4, or is it limited to 2? What's going on with the numbers here?
Yeah, Huzzah allows you to have, I think, up to 6. Blue Jeans allows you to have, I don't know, maybe 10 or something. I mean, it really allows you to load up. I think for most of these shows, more than 4 is getting a little excessive, right? It's too much. But Blue Jeans allows you to have certainly more than 4. Huzzah allows you to have more than 4. Crowdcast allows you to have at least 4. Fire Talk allows you to have 4. And then I'm not sure how many you can have with Be Live and Smile Time. I think Smile Time's at least 3, but I'm not positive. And I'm not sure. I haven't tried out Be Live. They're so new. There's so many of them now. But I plan to give all of them a test drive eventually. But certainly, if you're doing one-on-one interviews, they all work well for that. And then there's definitely a good bunch of them that allow you to have 4 or more people on camera at once.
Yeah, I think it's key to be able to have the extra people. I was so enamored by Blab, and it was, I really wish I had discovered it earlier, but whatever I'm going into, I'm going to want to have the ability to have 4, even if that's not routine for me. The trouble I have is committing to one because everything's moving so fast. As soon as I commit to one, especially if it's a paid program, a paid service, then, trying to untie myself from that to go to something else. So it's kind of put me into analysis paralysis. I wanted to talk to you about getting guests onto your live video broadcasts. I looked over the guest list from the last year that you've had, and you've had some remarkable people on your program, some really big names and people that are very busy in what they're doing. And so for people who are getting into live video and maybe they're wanting to do interviews, what would you advise them? Because everybody wants to have good names on their program, people who are out there making an impact. because it certainly promotes their new broadcast if they're wanting to get out there and get some interest in what they're doing. So, what are your tips on getting, guests on the show in general, and then for people who are wanting to reach higher up on the tree, getting some of the bigger names?
Well, I think if you develop a good process and you use it for everybody, not just the big names will see what they can get out of being on your show as well. So if I'm promoting everybody nicely who comes on my show and giving everybody a good guest experience, then the big names will see that and think, this could be worth it for me to do. I think there's definite value in scheduling ahead of time, right? Because these folks are busy. It's also important to think about what they need, what their calendar is. So are they coming out with a new book? Do they have a new website launching? Are they starting a new business, a new product? What do they need to promote? And then getting ahead of that cycle and getting to them early. So when they're deciding, okay, I'm going to do 20 shows around my new book or whatever, if you're the first one to ask, they may say, okay, I'll do 19 TV shows and one, live stream show or whatever,
Sure.
right? So there's timing. There's being able to show them that you're going to promote because you're doing it for other people, which is why I promote all my guests, not just the big names. So I have a process in place so I can say, you come on, I'm going to do this on Wednesday, then I'm going to share this on Thursday. On the day of the show, they'll be mentioned in my update. Later on, there'll be a blog post with a quote. The quote will be shared on Instagram. The blog post will include an embed from YouTube, and so on and so forth, right? So there's a whole ecosystem that they sort of become part of that promotes them beyond just how many people are in the room for the show or how many people view the replay. So I think that's a big part of it. I think also having a website where people can go and see past episodes and get a sense of what you're doing, putting it on YouTube. So if they go to YouTube and do a search, they can find it. Thinking in terms of your past shows, not just as how many views am I going to get from here or people I'm going to draw or convert or whatever, but this is sort of like a portfolio that lets a future guest know, okay, this is a solid person. They ask good questions. They can do a little due diligence on the host and say, okay, this is, just like when you asked me to come on your show, the first thing I did was I will listen to a couple minutes of your first couple shows, and I'm like, okay, this guy's good. This guy knows what he's doing.
Thank you.
He sounds great, very professional. Love the banners you put together to promote the whole thing, a website. You've got the whole thing put together that you're becoming part of something that I'm going to be proud to be a part of. Not you're interviewing me or the day you release the podcast, but as it grows and lives for 6 months, a year, 2 years, however long you keep things up, I'm going to be excited to be a part of it because I can tell that you have a whole process in place from booking the guest to thinking about what you're going to talk about to how you promote them to the interview itself to how you release the podcast and how you then, share, repurpose, promote beyond that and keep it alive beyond the day that it's released. So all those things, when I look at very quickly, I get a sense, and I'm not, putting myself in the category of some of the people that I've interviewed, but I'm sure they're doing the same thing, right? And they've often asked, how are you going to promote this or how are you going to share this? And I can quickly go through all the things that I do because it's a process that I use for all of my guests. If I only okay, I've got a big guest, so now I got to go out of my way and promote them, then I don't have that answer on the tip of my tongue, right?
Exactly.
And I think everybody should have a good experience, right? Anybody who takes an hour or whatever to come on my show should have a good experience. They should see their picture in a banner. They should have their name and their company shared on the tweets and on Instagram and be posted on Facebook page and all that stuff. So it's just how I like to do it. I mean, if the person wasn't interesting enough to promote, then they shouldn't be interesting enough to talk to. And if they're interesting enough for me to want to have on my show and want to talk to them and find out what they're doing and they're willing to give me an hour of their time, so what I'm saying is be consistent, promote everybody. Obviously, if you have, a superstar, right? You have Michael Jordan on your show or something like that. You're going to have a countdown clock to the interview. You're going to do, you're going to do a few things beyond, right? But I'm talking about having a sort of process that works for just about everybody, and people will see that. So I think it's important in how you promote. I think it's important to schedule ahead, and also to have a schedule that can be found by the guests. So I for my first year doing this, I scheduled like by, I don't know, April or May, I had the rest of the year scheduled. Now that's excessive, and I'm not going to do that next year because I want to be able to react more to the news and things like that. But in the beginning, when it came to getting good guests, I could give them the link and say, here, go to my website, check this out. And they see that all these people are scheduled, so that there's that social proof, right? Sure. If so many people have already committed to doing it, and he's got a schedule through the end of the year, then I'm guessing this isn't a fly-by-night thing, right? This is going to be around. The replays are going to be up for a long time. And I see that other people who I respect have committed to doing his show, and he's got all the past shows up and all that. So I think I'm giving a long explanation to maybe what was an easy question, but it's schedule, it's promote, it's ask, it's be thoughtful of what the other person needs and what works for their time frame. So when somebody has a book come out, they got to do a lot of interviews to show their publishing company they're promoting a book. Best time to grab them.
That's
right?
A great tip.
And it also is good for the discussion, right? It's much better to say you have a new book come out, what motivated you to write this, what's in this, how is this different than your past? I mean, the questions just write themselves when somebody has something that's in the news versus when, you're happy to have them, but then you've got to create a conversation and subject matter, more out of thin air, right? Than when there's actually something that they're passionate about that's been their work for the last year or two, and now they're excited to release it, and it's great. It's great to talk about that stuff. And you also, when you read their book, you get exposed to good ideas and things, which you might not do if they weren't coming on your show because we're all super busy and have so many demands. But all these things, they make you a better host. They make your guest a great experience, and they're good for the audience too.
Right. Well, tell me this. Interview. I was wanting to ask you just a little bit about interview tips because I think that you are a very experienced interviewer, and for somebody new getting started, they might want to know, like, what are some things you always do during an interview, or what's your plan for the interview, or what's some things you never do?
Okay. So what I try to never do, and you see people on even the major networks do this, is try to never ask a question that's just been answered. So if you have your list of questions, right, and at this point, I don't prepare a list. I have an idea what I want to talk to the person about before they come on. I have an idea of, say, 3 different topics that, we want to hit. But I'm comfortable just asking the questions as they come. It's super important to listen. And often a better next question will come from something that the person you're interviewing opened the door to than from whatever you might have had written down or in your mind that you were going to ask. And if it means that you only get to 10% of what you wanted to talk about, because the conversation's so good, don't feel you've got to double back and find that question that you were going to ask as the second question or whatever. It's fine, to have a list, and it's sometimes there's some shows where I wonder if I'm going to have enough material, or I want to make sure I remember to ask about certain things that I will have some notes in front of me. But the most important thing is the conversation. And also to be checking the chat, because the people in the chat ask good questions, and they'll ask things that, you and I might not have thought of, because they may know the person that you're interviewing, and this may be the first time you're talking to them. So they know them personally, and they're sharing a question that reveals, some inside knowledge or a personal story or something.
Sure.
Or they have an area of expertise that we don't have. And so by bringing their question and kind of crowdsourcing the chat, the chat comments, you can find a lot of wisdom and a lot of things that really enhance the show. So I'd say, the most important thing's listening, and don't forget about the chat, because there's some gems out there that you might not have had on your own mind. One other thing to keep in mind is that I think after about 15 to 20 minutes on a topic, people's minds start to wander a little bit, right? So if you can divide up, say, an hour show into, say, 3 themes, and they can be closely related, right? But I'm going to talk to him about his company for the first 20 minutes. The next 20 minutes, I'm going to talk to him about his hobbies. And the third 20 minutes, I'm going to talk to him about what's coming up next year or whatever. I mean, this is just, you'd structure it in a much different way. But you're getting the idea, right? You have 3 different things. So if somebody's not interested in the stuff about the company, it's going to change, right? And everybody sort of feels that momentum. So instead of like on radio after 10, 11 minutes, whatever, going to a break, at least after 15, 20 minutes, you switch the topic just before somebody's mind sort of wanders out, right? And that movement sort of brings people back in again. And it also gives you something, and a lot of people who do live streaming who don't have a broadcast background don't think about doing, which is recapping a little bit. You're talking with John Doe. He's shot 4 people. Whatever the reason you're interviewing, recap the name of the person and why they're on your show very quickly for people. And because a lot of people are just listening and not watching, right? Like when I watch a live stream show, I'll watch a little bit. I'll say hi to people in the comments, right? And then I'll go back into the other browser where I was doing work and listen. So I'm basically listening to a lot of live streams as though they were radio shows. So that recap of who the guest is and what's coming up, so that if I'm not really interested in the guest's childhood, but I know you're going to talk about their business later on, I'm talking with Todd Bergen, we're talking about podcasts, but later on we're going to talk about, how he got started in business. So somebody who might not be interested in Todd's podcast may be very interested in your views on business, right? So now you're keeping them engaged and you're keeping them on the page longer, listening, watching, what have you. So it's important to both tease what's coming up and to also recap, so that people who join a conversation in progress, and particularly on platforms like Facebook Live, where there's so many distractions and views are relatively short compared to other platforms, you need to let people know what's going on, what's coming up, why they should stay tuned.
There's a real art to all this. And it's something, it sounds like to me, is always evolving and never gets to a moment where it's perfect and complete.
Yeah, and you have to remind yourself to do these things, and eventually they become kind of muscle memory, and you just start doing it. But, you find places like if there's a lull for a second in the conversation, it's a great time to just go, and we're talking with Todd Bergen, we're discussing podcasting, we're talking about live streaming. Please do join us in the chat, whatever. Just hate everybody out on Facebook Live. Remember that the thing that makes these shows special, live shows online, what makes them special is that interactivity and that closeness with the audience, that connection, building those relationships, building that community, and keeping people coming back. And the way you do that is keeping them engaged, recognizing them, and keeping them informed of what you're doing.
You're exactly right. And like I said, it's an art. I mean, it's really an art, and it's, I'm just getting started, and I learned so much in the last 5 minutes about things that I could do that never even occurred to me. And actually things that you mentioned that I hear all the time on the radio. I never really thought there was a reason why they did it, but maybe there was, like a lull in the broadcast. Maybe that's why the host is reintroducing the person. Maybe that's part of their shtick, or maybe it's just a lull, it's also, I think it's beneficial even more so for, say, a podcast, right? Which is closer in some ways to radio, although podcast might not be live, but you may have somebody skip ahead in the podcast because they're looking for a certain topic or whatever. So if you have multiple guests on a podcast, reiterating who you're talking to maybe a couple times might be worthwhile, right? It might be beneficial, it might not. You got to see how that works for a podcast. But for a live video show where people are definitely coming in and out,
It's always good to do that. And a lot of times, if I'm not starting out with what is the topic that I think people are coming to hear or promote, right? Like, let's say I had somebody on because Blab, went off the air, right, for good, right?
Sure.
They shut down, right? I'll often say, we're going to talk about Blab in just a minute, but first I want to find out a little bit about my guest's background or whatever. Like, I'm already letting the audience that came to hear my thoughts and the guest's thoughts on Blab know we're going to get to it, right? But so that they'll stay through the 10 minutes that I spend talking about something else if what I had promoted was Blab, because that was the headline, right? That was going to be the heart of the show. But I want to give some context to who the person is and what they do, and certainly share their new website or their new show or whatever and ask them about that. So I'll often tease what's coming up later so that people who may not be that interested in the first thing know, like, we're going to get to the, you're going to get your desserts soon, but, first here's your vegetable.
Sure, yeah.
I don't really mean it like that, but you get the idea, right? What's dessert to one person's milk is another man's poison, or meat is another man's poison, or something like that, right? So we all have different aspects of an hour show that we'll find more interesting than others. So letting people know what's coming up, or and then the next stage is letting people know what the next show is, right? And maybe for a podcast you don't necessarily want to do that, or maybe you do want to do that, right? I don't know the art of podcasting to that degree yet, but for live streaming, I often say at the end of a show who's coming up next week, right? When's the next show? Who's coming up? Who I'm having? What we're going to talk about? All those things help keep that community thinking about the next time we're all getting back together.
Yeah, I've thought about doing that, introducing the next guest at the end of the show. Right now, though, for me, just my own experience, I'm working about 2 to 3 weeks out right now, and everybody's, look, if I were John Lee Dumas, I probably tell everyone that I'm going to interview that it's on Monday and here's your time slot, and people are going to accommodate that because I'm John Lee Dumas. Right. But I'm not John Lee Dumas, so right now I work totally around the schedules of everybody who I'd like to have as a guest, because that's the way I need to do it. So that people can adjust their time, or, find a time that works for them and come on. But, because of that, I'm not always sure how these are going. I mean, you and I were originally going to do a Monday, I think, recording, and we bumped it to Friday. So that happens, and it can affect the release schedule a little bit. And you mentioned the cards, the advertisements that I do. I send that artwork off to the artist, and she gets it whipped up, and I really don't want to have to pay her to make changes. So once it's set, it's just kind of set. But I think that you are going to there's a lot to learn in podcasting, and for both of us, I mean, we're both getting started right now at the same time.
Right.
And there's all sorts of little intricacies to make sure that this flows in a nice fashion and works for everybody, particularly the guest. Yes. Whose time is the most valuable in the whole enterprise every time there's a new interview. Ross, it's been a pleasure. I think what you're doing is fabulous, and it's interesting, and you're right at the beginning stages of live video, which, as this develops, you're always the one with the latest information and the guests that have the latest thoughts on it. Why don't you tell people where they can find you, and if they want to reach out, where, what platforms do you like to interact with people?
Right. So thank you, Todd, so much. The website is livestreamuniverse.com. I put daily updates Monday through Friday. Friday includes the weekend shows as well. I put daily updates on our Facebook page, facebook.com/livestreamuniverse. You can go there. You can see the updates there. And also, if you have a show, or you would like to promote a show, or you have some thoughts about something going on in live streaming, or a clip from your show that you think is fantastic, definitely reach out. Most people message me through the Facebook page. Again, facebook.com/livestreamuniverse. And I'd love to include your highlight clip, or your commentary, or, your show in the update. So definitely reach out to me if you're doing a show and you'd like to be included. But you can check out everything either by going to livestreamuniverse.com. That'll direct you to the social media sites, or by going to that Facebook page, facebook.com/livestreamuniverse. And that's also where we put our live shows as well.
Well, listen, Ross, that's awesome. Thank you so much for being a guest on the program. It's truly an honor on my end to have you on here. I think what you're doing is very exciting, and I look forward to being a part of it in any way that I can, and, of course, being there for you in any way that I can be there for you as well.
Thank you so much, Todd. Congratulations on the launch of this wonderful podcast, and you're really so meticulous, and you've thought everything through, and you've really prepared well, and I see great things for you going forward with this. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for you.
Well, thank you again so much. Folks, you can find me at divorcetheworkforce.com. Of course, as far as the podcast goes, please like, review, subscribe, and until next time, stay productive, my friends.